Welcome to the deep dive. We're doing something a bit different today.
Hmm.
Instead of the usual single book analysis, we're trying to nail down what makes a book summary podcast really, work.
Like the idea behind Chapter Crunch we discussed.
Exactly,
Yeah.
thinking about that kind of format. And we're using, interestingly, emotional intelligence as our lens for this.
Yeah, it's a fascinating angle. We've been exploring how these core ideas from emotional intelligence, they actually give us a really strong framework.
A framework for what specifically?
Well, for understanding what grabs listeners in a book summary podcast, what makes it feel valuable, practical,
And engaging.
right, and engaging, interactive, and also how the structure itself, that flow, keeps people listening. It's kind of about getting into the listener's mindset. Really.
Okay, let's unpack that. So we want to understand why these condensed audiobook summaries are so effective.
Mhm.
And emotional intelligence, understanding emotions, managing them, that's our guide. So for you listening, the mission today is basically to see how these EI concepts.
Things like connecting with emotions, both your own and others.
Yeah, and offering practical takeaways, getting listeners involved, and just having a well-organized show.
Hmm.
How all that is pretty essential if you want to create or even just really appreciate a great book summary podcast.
Exactly. And it's maybe worth remembering that this whole idea of understanding social dynamics, it isn't brand new.
Right.
People were talking about social intelligence
Yeah.
way back, Thorndike, early 20th century.
Yeah.
Then emotional intelligence, as we sort of know it now, Salivi and Mayer and others, really focused it on recognizing, understanding, managing, and using emotions effectively. That groundwork is relevant here.
Okay, here's where I think it gets really interesting for the podcast idea. You think about those summaries that just pull you in those accattivanti riassunti engaging summaries.
Mm-hmm.
It's got to be more than just listing the facts from the book.
Oh, absolutely.
It's about tapping into what's actually going to resonate. And that feels, it feels a lot like self-awareness from EI, doesn't it?
It really does. Understanding the core,
Mm.
the essence of the book's message,
Yeah.
is quite similar to understanding your own internal emotional state. Tuning in.
And there's empathy, too, surely. Like anticipating what bits of the book are going to be the most insightful or engaging for the listener.
Precisely. That's a huge part of it, seeing it from their perspective. A good podcast creator is thinking, okay, what are the key takeaways they need?
Right.
What questions might they have about this topic? It's about putting yourself in the listener's shoes.
So it's not just what the book says, but why it matters to the person tuning in.
Okay.
That leads nicely into the next point. Insight, practical insights.
Yes.
A summary needs to give you something you can actually use, doesn't it? Real-world applications. How does EI connect there?
Well, think about emotional regulation.
Hmm.
It's about managing impulses, focusing your attention, taking responsibility. In the context of a podcast summary, it's like filtering out all the less relevant details, maybe interesting anecdotes, but not core, and focusing energy on extracting the truly actionable advice.
Ah, I see. So managing the information impulse to deliver what's most useful.
Exactly. Instead of getting lost, you deliver focus.
That makes sense. We know emotional intelligence helps us in our own lives, right? Understanding our motivations, bouncing back from setbacks,
Resilience.
handling work stuff better. And a really good book summary podcast, it's aiming for something similar, isn't it? Giving you tools for your life.
That's the goal. So instead of just, say, walking through every chapter point by point,
Right.
a podcast using this principle would maybe highlight the 2 or 3 core ideas that offer the most direct, actionable advice. It delivers those aha moments you can actually apply.
For relationships, work, happiness, parenting, all those areas EI touches.
Exactly. Mirroring those real-world benefits of being emotionally intelligent.
Mhm.
Practical application is key.
Okay, practical insights, got it. Now, what about making it interactive, that interattivita point? Why bother with that in a summary podcast? And what's the EI link?
Well, the link here is really to social awareness and relationship management. It's quite fascinating.
How so?
Think about it. Engaging your audience, maybe with questions or polls, asking for suggestions,
Mhm.
that directly mirrors understanding what others feel, need, or value in a social setting. It shows you're tuned into them, not just broadcasting.
So it makes the listener feel, seen, part of it.
Exactly. Part of the conversation, not just a passive recipient. It builds a connection, a sort of community feel.
Like building trust in a relationship.
Precisely.
Mm.
And like any good relationship, it involves listening and valuing input. When a podcast asks for feedback or suggestions for future books,
Yeah.
it's signaling that the audience's perspective matters. that fosters connection, just like empathy fosters respect and intimacy in personal relationships. They might even say, look up common questions people ask online about a book to make sure the summary covers those points.
Right, so it's about that two-way street, even in an audio format. Okay, engaging summaries, practical insights, interactivity. The last piece was structura dynamica, dynamic structure.
Mhm.
What does that mean for a podcast? And how does EI fit in there?
Okay, so think about emotional agility. That's about recognizing shifting emotional patterns, understanding their message, and responding in line with your values. It's about adapting.
Adapting. Okay.
A dynamic podcast structure, maybe a brief, punchy intro, the core summary, then practical takeaways, perhaps some memorable quotes, and a clear wrap-up. That flow keeps listeners engaged.
It stops at feeling monotonous.
Exactly. It's structured, but it moves. It adapts to hold attention. Much like emotional agility helps us handle emotional transitions effectively.
Yeah.
You're guiding the listener smoothly.
So it's like being aware of the listener's likely attention span, maybe, and changing gears to keep them locked in.
Precisely that. Moving between segments, summary, application, quote, conclusion in a way that feels natural, not jarring. It helps deliver the information effectively without overwhelming people. It's about respecting their time and experience.
And I guess that ties back to the practical insights, too. You need that good structure to deliver the practical stuff effectively.
Absolutely. They all work together. That clear, dynamic structure makes the engaging summary digestible and the practical insights memorable.
So when you pull it all together, these elements aren't just like nice to haves, are they?
No, I'd argue they're pretty fundamental, especially when viewed through this EI lens. Engaging summaries tap into self-awareness and empathy.
Right.
Practical insights connect to emotional regulation and focus.
Uh-huh.
Interactivity leverages social awareness and relationship skills.
Okay.
And that dynamic structure reflects a kind of emotional agility in communication. It's all about creating an experience that doesn't just inform, but actually connects.
So wrapping this up, this deep dive, looking at successful book summary podcasts through the lens of emotional intelligence. It really highlights that effective audio learning is, well, it's more than just spitting out facts.
It really is. It's about understanding and connecting with you, the listener, on a more, how do I say, emotional level.
Yeah. Which leads to a thought for you listening. How can you take these principles, engagement, practicality, interactivity, that dynamic structure, all kind of inspired by EI? How can you apply those to your own learning? Or even when you're sharing knowledge with someone else?
That's a great question. Thinking about how understanding emotional responses, needs, how that can enhance just about any kind of communication or teaching.
It definitely makes you think differently about the podcasts you really enjoy, doesn't it?
It does.
Maybe reflect on why certain ones keep you coming back. Is it how they summarize, the advice, the community feel, the flow? Chances are some of these elements we've talked about are playing a big role. It's the whole package, not just the info dump.